Hi, my name is Bhanu Prakash. I'm having around 10 plus of experience in Java, Spring Boot, Spring Microservices, and also Oracle various technologies. Okay. In today's session, I'm going to explain about Hibernate, JPA, and how we are going to implement this in the Spring Boot. Before that one, let me see what is a JPA. JPA stands for Java Persistent API. Okay. So JPA is a standard Java API that defines how Java objects map to the relation database tables, facilitating the ORL relation mapping. Okay, and always you have to remember JPA is like a specs. And people have a misconception, like they think that JPA is like a implementation. JPA is a specs, like how we have the JDBC as a specs, and different vendors like Oracle, MySQL, H2 has been implemented. And remember this JPA is specs, and there are different vendors like example Hibernate, Eclipse Link, etc. Vendor agnostic specification, JPA is a specification, not an implementation, allowing different providers like Hibernate, Eclipse Link to implement its contract interchangeability. Key concepts, core concepts or entity, a persistent object. Okay, basically an entity is like a table. Okay, where let me assume that I have an employee, student, and you can each variable in the entity you can map to a column. Okay, ID, name, salary, or student number, student roll number, student name, address, etc. Okay, and also it provides a caching mechanism. This is very important, persistent context caching. And also it has its own QL, like how we have this query language. It has a something called Java persistent query language, where you can easily retrieve the details like employee, student, etc. We will see more on that. Next one is purpose and the benefits. JPA promotes portability and consistent across Java application, providing a unified way of handling database interaction and without a vendor lock-in. Okay, you need not worry about what is the final database you are using. It can be MySQL, it can be Oracle, but using this JPA, you need not worry about that. It provides a framework kind of a thing where you can interact with a different database. Okay, and also what are the queries, if you want to see easily, it's visible in your console, where we will see on that with a practical example. What is an Hibernate? JPA implementation or an ORM. Hibernate is a who has implemented the JPA specs, okay, and comprises the object relation manager frameworks, specifying the database interaction in Java applications. Advanced features. It extends the JPA capabilities by offering caching mechanism. When we say that there is a different types of a caching, one is object caching. Okay, that means instead of directly hitting every time to the database, thus information, it fetches the information and stores in the object. So next time if user is trying to hit, it gets it from the object. Okay. Optimal performance improvement. There is a lot of performance because we are using this caching mechanism. There is a lot of performance improvement. Ecosystem and modules. Hibernate has a mature ecosystem with multiple versions, core modules like Hibernate Core, ORM Essentials, and the Entity Manager for the JPA interaction, which are commonly used in the Spring Boot. These are especially the Entity Manager you will be using a lot in your Spring Boot, especially on the database CRUD operations. And Spring Boot plus JPA Hibernate overview. Let me see a overview on this. Simplified repository layer. Spring Data JPA abstracts the boilerplate code by providing ready-to-use repository interface, enabling the CRUD operations and query method creation without the manual implementation. If you typically see any JDBC code, right, where you have to import the particular jar, you have to write a lot of logic where you have to open the connection, close the connection, result set, and you have to provide the query, and you have to write a complicated logic on the transactions, etc. But using the JPA, what happens is it totally eliminates boilerplate code, and writing a code in the JPA is pretty simple, and it gives a lot of inbuilt API features. Auto configuration feature. Spring Boot automatically configures the data source, okay, Entity manager factory, transaction manager. Okay, if you have any transaction, we will see how simple it is. You specify at the rate transaction, then you will get a like rollback, commit, all these things. You need not worry, everything will be handled by the transaction manager. Okay, reducing the manual setup and the configuration errors. Configuration were the properties. All this you can define in the application properties or application.yaml file. Okay, where you can specify your what is the URL, username, password, database username, password, all those stuff, etc. Key configuration properties which we should be available: basic Spring Boot configuration, data source URL. What is, for example, what is that? If you are using the MySQL URL, you have to provide. If you have the username, password, those things you will be providing to connect to the your database. Hibernate auto DDL schema. These are the something: validate schema, update schema, create, all those stuff. And show SQL, as I told, it gives the out of box features. What is happening? What is the query? If you want to see, you can see it with using this property. Defining an entity. Entity is like a table, okay, and it's like you are mapping your attributes with the columns of your table. For example, you have a ID, roll number, name, address, etc. that you can map it to your employee. For example, I have an employee object and it has ID, name, salary, and in your you have an employee table where you have a ID, name, salary. You can easily map one to one. Okay, primary key, it has an auto generation like identity, columns like constraint, and also you can apply a number of it. Let us assume that your column doesn't take nulls. Okay, nullable, false, based on that, and the length, it will take maximum of 100 characters. All those things you can. And unique. Okay, for example, it's a unique. You cannot have a duplicates. Okay, and email if you want to specify the regex, all those stuff. Primary key strategy, adding like identity, sequence, all those things. If you want to generate a auto sequence, all those things, it's possible. Entity relationships, relation types: one to one, one to many, many to many, many to one. Like for example, one employee can have only one address. Okay, this let me assume that one employee can have the one, that is one to one, and one employee can belong to the one department, or one department can have a many employees. Okay, and an employee can be multiple employees in the multiple projects. Typically in a project it will that becomes a many to many. So these can be defined cardinality of association between the entities, allow flexible data modeling of real world relationships. Owning versus inverse side. The owning side manages the relations and the foreign key. Okay, the inverse side uses mapping by to point back, ensuring the synchronizations and avoiding redundancy. Okay, the next one is a cascade, fetch, and orphan removal. Cascade controls entity state propagation. Fetches like lazy and eager, like if you want to load like the startup or the lazy loading, that concept. Determine whether the related data loads. Orphan removal deletes depending on the entities with unliked. Performance, this is very important. It has a lot of performance. Beware of n+1 query problem with eager fetching, where one can use excessively queries. Prefer lazy loading and use fetches joins to perform optimization performance. Repository and CRUD. Java repository for CRUD operations. If you want to, it provides you many inbuilt methods. Like suppose, for example, if you want to save automatically, you can use the save it may. And find by ID, if you want to find by ID like employee ID, student ID, you can use this API. Find all if you want to fetch all the employees. Okay, or delete if you want to delete. Okay, so Spring JPA provides an interface that built-in CRUD methods like save, find by, find all, delete, etc., allowing the quick and easy data manipulation. Custom query, as I told, it uses internal your JPQL, Java persistent query language, where you can easily fetch that. It's look like similar to the SQL, but it has its own. For example, I want to fetch all those records of the employee. You can use the JPQL okay, or if you want to fetch by salary greater than 5,000, or if you want to fetch by ID and name, it's all easy using the JPQL. Okay. The next one is pagination sorting. It provides the out of box, leveraging the pageable sort parameters in repository methods, handle large data sets, etc. JPA and criteria, you can, as I told, you can give the criteria. For example, you want to add some conditions. Okay, if my login is matching here and I want to get the employee whose salary is 5,000, and you want to order by employee number and name using the JPQL. JPQL uses entity objects and uses relationships to form the query similar to SQL, but operating on the Java classes. Okay, for example, here is a query, select U from user, where you dot email, okay, where you can define, etc. Criteria, the criteria are dynamic and type safe. The criteria API allows building queries programmatically with Java objects, supporting the complex dynamic queries. If you have a complex dynamic, for example, let's assume that I have a query where I want to fetch all the employees whose salary is greater than 10,000, okay, or little bit complex, not like a straightforward select star from employee star from student, but if you want to have the outer joins, inner joins, okay, multiple conditions, you have those things are easily possible. Okay, native queries when needed, use native queries, or a complex or database specific operations are not easily expressed in JPQL, and you can write your native query, you can say as a true, and you can write your query which are specific to, for example, there is a query which is specific to only Oracle. Those things also it is possible. Transaction management. Transaction, as I told, transaction management is, it's like a unit. Okay, let me assume that I'm placing an order, I'm doing a payment. Okay, you have placed an order and it has generated an order ID. Until unless you have done the payment, your order is not completed. So this entire process, placing an order, doing the payments, everything is like a one unit of work. So what should happen is, until unless my payment is done and order is placed successfully, any of this operation has been failed, it has to roll back. So this is one transaction. So either one option, you commit this or you can roll back. Okay, so any of this fails, you have to roll back. So automatically the transaction management will take care. You need not write. Previously we used to write a lot of coding, like programmatic coding. Okay, if this happens, you do this, or you have to take care. But when it comes to this, automatically the framework will take care. Okay, and there are different isolations levels. Okay, and also propagations like required, required new, depends upon your requirement, you can pass. For example, I have a parent EA which is calling the B method, and if you want to have the parent A transaction carried to the child, then you can have, or in the child, if you want to always start a new transaction as separate, then requires new, you can use all those different mechanism you have. Locking mechanism, optimization locking, versions, annotations, or different concurrent modifications by versioning and pessimistic locking. Pessimistic locking locks the database rows, preventing conflict during the transaction process. This is also one good mechanism. Suppose I'm doing I'm doing some process on the particular row, you want to lock it, then you can use the locking mechanism. Consistent and isolations, there are different types of isolations, recommitted, repeatable read, etc. Okay, of the concurrent transactions. Proper transaction boundaries, maintain data consistent and prevent anomalies. Okay, caching and the performance. The first level caching is persistent context scope. These are the different caching of the first level caching and the second level caching. The first level caching is the persistent context scope to the entity manager or a transaction. It stores the entities to avoid repeatable database access within the same session. The second one is the object caching, where, for example, if you have a repeated queries you are fetching, for example, like, okay, select star from employee where employee salary is 5,000. If there is a query you are trying to use the frequently, it will get cached in your object. So next time, every time it will not go to the database, or that query it will get cached. Query tuning techniques. Okay, if you have a batch size, all those things you can fine tune. Monitoring and tips, enable SQL login. If you want to see how what is the SQL it has generated, there are the different features where JPA show SQL, and use this tool for monitoring. Avoid eager fetching, pitfalls, n+1 query problems, or maintaining this one. Testing and DB migrations, repository testing. There is something called Data JPA test, where you can write your unit testing. Use JPA test annotation for focusing testing on JPA repository explicitly. It configures in the in-memory database like H2, enable fast isolation test and rollback, etc. Schema migration with flyover or liquid base. Manages database schema changes, reliability using the flyway, liquid base. Both tools integrate smoothly with Spring Boot using the version migration scripts that runs on the application startup and schema constraint. Testing best practice. It uses industry standard best practices. Leverage the transaction rollback. Test the main if you want to check your transactions. Okay, and all those stuff like test containers for testing against real DB engines. That is also possible. Minimal service controllers. For example, at the rate transaction, as I told. Okay. There are two ways of transaction. One is declarative transaction, programmatic transactions. Programmatic transactions, or if you want to take control of the transactions, okay, when you want to commit, when you want to roll back, if there is an exception, all those things. Declarative transaction is whenever you say the framework will take care, it knows when to commit, when to roll back, all those stuff. User control expose the REST API, the post layer architecture. So typically, right, how your layer is, you will be having the controller will be talking to the service layer, and the service layer will be talking to the JPA, which finally talking to the database. Okay, we'll see with an examples, but that is how it will have. Summary and the resource key points. JPA defines a standard ORM specifications. Hibernate is a mature feature. Many of the projects use Hibernate, especially when it comes to the ORM mapping. Okay, Spring Boot and Spring JPA streamlines configuration, repository managing, enhance developer productivity. Important considerations: manage entity relationships carefully to avoid performance issues. Okay, use transaction to ensure the data consistency. Optimize the performance with caching and query tuning. Okay, explore the official JPA specs. For more information, you can go to the JPA specifications, looking to the Hibernate documentation, Spring Data JPA reference, all those stuff. Okay, and let me see a practical so let me see the practical example using the. So what I have done is I will be showing you how we can do the CRUD operations using the JPA repository as well as the Hibernate. Okay, first let me see the pom.xml. This is a pom.xml where you'll be having the dependencies. You have to add. Java version I'm using is 17, and here the dependency, the starter dependency, starter web. The next one is, this is the important for the JPA, starter data JPA, and Hibernate Hibernate core. The version is 6.4 final. I'm using the MySQL for our demo purpose. So com.mysql, and here you can see 8.1.0. The next one is, I'll be using the Jakarta transaction. As I told, transaction is, there are two types of transaction. One is declarative as well as a programmatic. If you are going with the programmatic, you have to handle when to commit the changes or when to save the changes, when to roll back the transactions, all those stuff. But if you are using the declarative, everything is taken care by the framework, so it knows when to commit the changes, roll back, etc. And here is the dev tools. As I told, whenever I do a changes, I need not restart my server, automatically it will get implemented. Okay, so the next one is the, here is the project hierarchy, how it will look like. Okay, so here you can see, this is the main class like a Spring Boot. This is the controller. The entry point is the controller. The controller will call the service. Service will be calling your JPA. JPA in turn return call the database operation. Okay. So here you can see all my controllers. I say @controller. Okay. This is I'm using the REST controller, and here you can see that customer service. Okay. And implementation is a customer service. Here you have to specify as a @service. The transaction, that means you are telling that it's a declarative transaction. You are asking the framework to take care of this transactions. Okay. The next one is from the here, and here you can see it's a customer repository where you have this JPA. The advantage of using the JPA, it comes with the out of box methods like find all, save, delete, get all records, etc. So if you see, right, I'm not at all writing. You are totally eliminating the boilerplate code, and you are not at all writing any code. You are using the out of box feature. Okay. And if you see here, for example, this is on this. So what we will do is we'll go one by one. First, let me see the JPA, then we will come to the Hibernate. Okay. So here is the, as I told, customer controller. Don't worry about this Hibernate. We'll come to this. As of now, let me concentrate on this customer controller. The customer controller will call the customer service. That means your controller will call the service. The service internally calls the your JPA repository. If you go for the controller service IMPL, and he internally it is calling, this is I'm using the customer injection, and here you can see the customer repository, and finally this will interact with your database. The next and more important things, application properties. Here you are specifying your MySQL username, password, the driver name, and Spring JPA update. And also I will show you, whenever you say true, you can actually see what is the query it is doing: insert query, update query, delete query, all those stuff. And here dialog, Hibernate dialog, I am using it. Okay. So let me see, I have written a Postman collection to test it, and first let me see the creating a customer. I am creating the one of the customer, like maybe Sham, or just I am giving. Okay, here you can see post I am using, might be this is the email and telephone number. So when you click on the send, here you can see it has created, and this ID is the auto generation. If you really see here the customer entity, here you can see that entity. Sorry, I have forgot to talk about the entity. So this is I am using the customer entity. It is like same as your table, but the object. Here what you can do is, here you can map if you want. Here is the ID, the identity, and here what you can specify is you can specify the column name also. Okay, if you want to specify this column, this attribute is mapping to the database column name, you can also specify that. Okay, here you can say the entity @entity. You have to specify @table. What is this? This is a mapping to the customers table, and here is ID name, and here is the setters and getters. Okay, so here you can see insert into customer email and name, because ID is the auto generation. Let me see. Let me get all the records. Get all customers. Okay. Here you can see this is the get operation. You click on send. So here you can see what are the records which are there recently. Here you can see the recently created Sham. Here you can see there are 4. Okay. Here one, it's a sequence number 3, 4, 5, all those thing. And next one is if you want to fetch by the ID. Okay. Let me assume that this is a 4. And here you can see here 4 Sham and his email. Okay. This is the get operation. So here just if you go to the customer control, here there are different operations. For example, create, post, get mapping by ID, and delete. If let me I want to delete. Okay. The next one is the delete operation. You want to delete by ID 4. Okay. So here you can see deleted customer successfully, and if you try to see get all customers, you should not see this Sham record. Here you can see only 2 records are 1 and 3. 2 previously I have deleted. You can see that 4 got automatically deleted. Okay. So this is how you can see whenever you try to hit, it will come to here. From here it will go to service layer, service to JPA, JPA to database. And next one, same thing, let me using the Hibernate. Here you can see I have written same operation. Instead of just only the endpoint URL has changed. Okay, the request matching. Here I am using API Hibernate customers, and this will talk to the Hibernate customer service here. And if you see, this is the implementation. So Hibernate, it uses something called entity manager. Okay, this is the entity managers is the Jakarta, the latest one. This is Jakarta persistent entity manager. Transaction Jakarta, we are using the transactional. Okay, when I say the transaction as it works as a unit, just to provide more example to it, let me assume that I have the order service. You are placing an order, that is a one task, and there is a one worker you are paying, do the final doing the payment. Okay, so all this will work as a unit. Placing an you are adding the you are placing an order as well as a payment. Let me assume that if due to some reason my payment has been failed, the entire transaction has to roll back. Okay, so all these transactions, it will using this transaction, it will handle it. So here you can say save customer. So there is something called persist. That means it adds the record. The next one is, okay, if you want to fetch all the customer details, then you can say create query. It's same as your select star from customers. So it has out of box and get result list, which returns the result list. And here get customer by ID. There is something called find, where you can pass the find, and if you want to pass find by ID or a name, you can easily find out. Delete, here you can see find. First of all, you have to find out, and if it is there is a remove operation. Okay, let me see the example. So I have created a separate collections for this. Okay, here you can see. Let me go to the, if I am trying to create a customer, here something called Bhanu, and this one might be, I will say, okay. So here you can say total 5th Hibernate, I have created one record successfully. The next one is if you want to fetch get all the customer details, click on send. Here you can see 1, 3, and recently whatever we have created, Sai, using the sum. And next one is get customer by ID. If I say I am passing as a 5. Okay. Remember, here I haven't done the exception because that itself is a big topic. How to handle a user-defined exceptions and how to handle the global exception. Maybe in the next coming sessions I will handle. But as of now, I haven't handled the exception handling. Okay. The next, if you want to delete the customer, suppose let me assume that I want to delete based on the 5. So give the 5. And it says that deleted successfully. So this is an example using this. So in this session, I want to cover the JPA as well as the Hibernate, provide the samples and the transaction manager, how we can do with some simple examples. Okay. So for more information, you can go through the documentation, but the entire intention is to get an overview on the JPA, Hibernate, how this ORM mapping tool, how the database operations happens, and what is the just an example how this JPA and the Hibernate works. Okay, so this covered the session. Might be in the coming sessions I will explain about the global exceptions and all those stuff. Have a nice day. Thank you.